Nigeria has over 200 million people. Nigeria has Lagos, Abuja, Kano, names you already know. But somewhere between the traffic and the headlines, there is a version of this country almost nobody films. A castle built by a German count in the middle of House of Farmland. A rock that has watched over a city for longer than the city has existed. A national park bigger than some countries, where roads simply stop and the forest takes over. Today, we're counting down 5 places in Nigeria that are technically visible on a map, but functionally invisible to the rest of the world. Stay until number 1. It's not what you're expecting from West Africa. This is international hike, and this is your passport to the places the algorithm forgot. No filters, no tour buses, no fixers. Just 5 real locations, ranked from impressive to almost unbelievable. Let's start the countdown. Number 5, Eco-Atlantic, Lagos State. Most people who've heard of this place call it Nigeria's Dubai. That comparison is lazy, but the ambition behind it is real. Eco-Atlantic is a city being built from nothing, on land that didn't exist 20 years ago. Millions of tons of sand, dredged from the ocean floor, poured behind a 9.5-kilometer seawall, nicknamed the Great Wall of Lagos. That wall isn't decoration. It's the only thing standing between this new district and an ocean that had already swallowed entire streets of old Lagos through coastal erosion. Unlike Lagos itself, a city that grew organically over centuries, dense and chaotic, Eco-Atlantic was designed on a blank canvas. Planners laid out wide boulevards, underground utility tunnels, its own power grid, water treatment, and drainage systems built to handle floods that regularly cripple the rest of Lagos. The vision, a financial hub for West Africa. Think Dubai's Palm Jumeirah energy, but planted on Nigeria's Atlantic coastline. Corporate headquarters, luxury towers, and a promise of reliable electricity and clean water in a country where both are often luxuries. Eco-Atlantic isn't a resort development bolted onto an existing coastline. It is a city being built from nothing, on land that 20 years ago did not exist. Not underdeveloped land, not reclaimed swamp, actual open ocean, filled in foot by foot until it became solid ground you can stand on. That barrier is the Eco-Atlantic seawall, locally nicknamed the Great Wall of Lagos. It stretches roughly 9.5 kilometers along the exposed ocean-facing edge of the development. Built from over 100,000 5-ton concrete armor units, interlocked like puzzle pieces to absorb and dissipate wave energy before it ever reaches the reclaimed land behind it. This isn't decorative infrastructure. It is the single reason the entire project is viable. Without it, the Atlantic would simply reclaim the reclaimed land within a matter of storm seasons. Behind that wall sits the reclaimed territory itself. Dredged sand, pumped from the ocean floor by specialized vessels, deposited and compacted over roughly 10 square kilometers, forming a peninsula that didn't exist as solid ground within most of our lifetimes. Here's the part almost nobody mentions. Eco-Atlantic is designed to be a self-contained city. Its own power grid, its own drainage, its own roads, built for an estimated 250,000 residents and 250,000 more commuting in daily. It's a private financial district rising out of the Atlantic, funded largely outside government hands in a country where infrastructure projects usually crawl. Whatever you think about who gets to live there, you cannot say it isn't one of the most audacious land reclamation projects on the entire continent. And yet, outside Nigeria, almost nobody's heard of it, which tells you something about how much of this country stays hidden in plain sight. Because number 4 isn't man-made at all. It's older than Lagos, older than Nigeria itself, and it's been quietly terrifying and fascinating people for centuries. Number 4, Zuma Rock, Niger State. Here's a strange fact to open with. You've probably already seen this rock, and you probably didn't register it. It's printed on the Nigerian Naira note. It sits directly beside the highway connecting Abuja to Kaduna, one of the busiest transport corridors in the entire country. Close enough that commuters, traders, and travelers drive past its base every single day. And that daily exposure is exactly why it stopped registering. Zuma Rock is simultaneously one of the most photographed natural landmarks in Nigeria, and one of the least understood, because familiarity has quietly replaced curiosity. Local legend calls Zuma the gateway to Abuja. And if you study the western face of the rock at the right hour, typically late afternoon, when the sun sits low and throws long shadows across the granite, many people say they can make out what looks distinctly like a human face staring out across the savanna. Eyes, nose, mouth, formed entirely by natural shadow and erosion patterns. Geologists have a considerably plainer explanation, though it's no less fascinating for being plain. Zuma rock is what's known as an Inselberg, literally island mountain in German, a solid monolithic dome of granite left standing in isolation after the softer surrounding rock eroded away around it over the course of millions of years. Nigeria's Middle Belt region contains several Inselbergs, but none approach Zuma's scale or its cultural prominence. What you're looking at geologically is essentially the exposed, weather-resistant core of a much larger rock formation that has otherwise entirely disappeared. But plain geological science has never stopped Zuma from becoming a spiritual and cultural landmark. For generations, communities in the surrounding region have treated the rock as sacred ground, tied to older belief systems about ancestral spirits watching over the land and its people. Some local traditions hold that the rock has protective significance, a silent guardian positioned at the threshold of the nation's capital region, watching over travelers passing beneath it. Whether or not you take the spiritual framing literally, it's worth noting that this kind of monolith as sacred site pattern shows up across dozens of cultures worldwide, from Uluru in Australia to countless sacred mountains throughout Asia and the Americas. Humans, it seems, are drawn to assign meaning to the rare places where the earth itself seems to be making a deliberate statement. What makes Zuma genuinely rare, beyond the mythology, is its physical scale and shape. This isn't a hill you casually hike up on a weekend visit. It is a sheer monolith, and the overwhelming majority of its surface is essentially unclimbable without technical mountaineering gear and serious rock climbing experience. There have been documented attempts by climbing groups and adventure tourists over the years, but this is not a casual ascent. It's a genuine technical challenge on exposed granite. So while millions of Nigerians pass Zuma rock every single year, driving beneath it on their way to work, to market, to family, almost none of them have ever actually stood on top of it. It occupies a strange category of landmark, one you're fundamentally meant to witness from below, not conquer from above. In an era where almost every notable landform on Earth eventually gets a hike to the summit video, Zuma remains stubbornly, physically resistant to that kind of content, which might be part of why it stays so underexplored in international travel media, even as it stays visually iconic within Nigeria itself. And here's the layer most people miss entirely. Because Zuma sits so close to Abuja, and because it's so visually striking from the road, it functions almost like wallpaper for people who live in the region. Ask a Lagos resident about Zuma rock, and they'll likely recognize it instantly from the currency. Ask someone who drives past it weekly, and you'll often get a shrug. It's just there. That's the paradox at the heart of this entry. Zuma isn't hidden because it's remote. It's hidden because it's overexposed to the point of invisibility. Quick pause, because what's coming at number 3 might be the single most physically strange location on this entire list. A beach that shouldn't look the way it looks, sitting in a state most people outside Nigeria couldn't find on a map if you gave them 30 seconds. Let's keep going. Number 3. Brass Beach, Bayelsa State. Bayelsa sits deep inside the Niger Delta, a sprawling maze of creeks, tributaries, and mangrove channels so dense and interconnected that many communities in the state are only reachable by boat even today. Within that maze sits Brass, a small coastal town that hides one of the strangest and most visually distinctive beaches anywhere in West Africa. Brass Beach's sand carries a dark, almost volcanic tint, a striking departure from the pale, coral-derived sand most people picture when they think of tropical coastline. This coloration comes from mineral-rich sediment, carried for hundreds of kilometers down through the Niger Delta's dense river systems before finally meeting the Atlantic coastline. The Niger River, one of Africa's great waterways, drains an enormous watershed before splitting into the countless distributary channels that make up the delta. And along the way, it picks up and transports sediment loads that eventually deposit along stretches of the coast like brass, giving the beach its distinctive, dark character. This isn't a resort destination, and that's precisely the point. There are no beach clubs here, no sun loungers, no entry fee at a gate. Brass has functioned as a working port and regional trading town since long before European colonial mapmakers ever drew it on a chart. Historical trade routes through the Niger Delta connected inland communities to coastal trading posts for centuries, moving goods, salt, and eventually, in one of the darker chapters of this region's history, moving people during the transatlantic slave trade era, when coastal delta towns became entangled in that horrific trade network. Brass, like several other delta port towns, carries that layered, complicated history embedded in its identity, even as its modern daily rhythm looks almost entirely disconnected from it. Today, the beach functions the way it always has, generation after generation. Fishing boats heading out before sunrise, nets spread out to dry along the sand through the morning, children playing in the shallows where the tide pulls back in the afternoon. It's not staged for visitors. It's not maintained for tourism. It's simply the working shoreline of a community that has lived alongside this stretch of coast for longer than most nations on Earth have existed in the current form. The Delta's remoteness is exactly why a place like Brass Beach stays hidden from wider recognition. Reaching it often means navigating boat travel through creek networks that simply don't appear with any real clarity on standard road maps or GPS routing apps built for conventional overland travel. Add to that the broader reputation the Niger Delta region has picked up over the decades, tied to oil infrastructure, environmental controversy, and periodic security concerns in parts of the wider delta. A beach with almost no visible footprint of commercial tourism. No resort chains have claimed this stretch. No beachfront developments have reshaped its dunes. Just water, dark volcanic-tinted sand, and a rhythm of daily life that has changed remarkably little across generations. A living coastline rather than a curated one. From a beach that almost no outsider ever reaches, to a castle that, quite honestly, has no logical business existing where it does. Number 2 is going to sound like fiction. Number 2, Kajuru Castle, Kaduna State. There is a real, fully functioning, European-style castle in northern Nigeria. Not a film set, not a replica built for a single photo opportunity. An actual castle, turrets, a defensive perimeter wall, stone battlements, built on a hilltop roughly 40 kilometers outside Kaduna City, in territory that is otherwise defined by farmland, savanna, and traditional Hausa and Fulani village life. The story behind Kajuru Castle is, if anything, stranger than the building itself. It was constructed by a German expatriate, Gerhard Ivo Müller, sometimes referred to locally by an honorary title, reflecting his adopted status within the community, who settled in the Kaduna region decades ago and, over an extended period of years, built himself a genuine hilltop castle on land he had come to consider home. This wasn't a corporate development or a government-backed tourism project. It began as one man's deeply personal residence, constructed according to his own architectural vision, using materials and labor sourced largely from the surrounding region. What started as a private home eventually evolved into something considerably larger in scope. Over time, the castle opened as a guest house and retreat, and today it functions as one of the most genuinely surreal accommodations found anywhere on the African continent. Complete with a self-styled royal court atmosphere, staff dressed in period-appropriate attire for guest experiences, and a working hospitality operation that hosts visitors for weekend stays, corporate retreats, and even film and television productions, looking for a distinctly medieval, European backdrop without leaving West Africa. What makes Kajuru genuinely fascinating isn't purely the architecture, impressive as it is. It's the contrast baked directly into its location. Step outside the castle's outer walls, and you are immediately back in rural Kaduna State. Farmland stretching toward the horizon, dirt roads connecting village to village, community life continuing largely as it has for generations, largely untouched by the fantasy structure sitting on the hill above it. Step back inside those walls, and you are somewhere that feels lifted wholesale from a European fairy tale. Stone corridors, heraldic details, an entire aesthetic vocabulary imported from a different continent and a different architectural tradition. That collision, genuine old-world European fantasy architecture, dropped directly into the Nigerian savanna, surrounded by the ordinary rhythms of rural life, is something you genuinely cannot find replicated with this level of authenticity anywhere else in West Africa. It isn't a theme park. It isn't a themed hotel chain following a corporate template. It is the fully realized personal vision of one man, built stone by stone over years, standing today as a functioning piece of hospitality infrastructure in one of Nigeria's more conservative and traditionally rural states. So why hasn't Kajuru Castle become a global viral sensation the way similarly strange photogenic locations often do elsewhere? Part of the answer is regional perception. Kaduna State and northern Nigeria more broadly has at various points over the past 2 decades been associated in international media coverage with security concerns. Coverage that, fairly or not, tends to overshadow more nuanced stories about the region, including stories as strange and delightful as a functioning fairy tale castle in the savannah. Part of the answer is simply logistics. Reaching Kajuru requires travel into the Nigerian interior that most international tourists and content creators simply never attempt, given easier, more heavily marketed alternatives elsewhere on the continent. And part of it, frankly, is that the story is almost too strange to be believed at a glance. A German-built castle in rural northern Nigeria doesn't fit neatly into the existing mental categories most people carry around for what Nigeria or West Africa is supposed to look like. It defies expectations so thoroughly that it gets quietly filtered out, dismissed as a curiosity rather than investigated as the genuinely remarkable piece of personal architectural history that it actually is. If a castle in the savannah sounds unbelievable, wait until you see what's waiting at number 1. It isn't a building, it isn't a beach. It is an entire wilderness so vast, so genuinely unmapped in parts, that even Nigerians themselves rarely go there. And when they do, they call it the country's last true frontier. But before we continue, I would want you to click the subscribe button below and like this video to push it further. Number 1. Gashaka-Gumti National Park, Taraba and Adamawa states. This is Nigeria's largest national park, over 6,500 square kilometers of rainforest, wooded savanna, and high montane grassland, anchored by Chapal Wadi, the highest peak in the entire country, standing over 2,400 meters above sea level. To put that scale into perspective, Gashaka-Gumti alone covers more territory than several entire sovereign nations, and it sits almost completely off unknown to numerous people. Here's what makes Gashaka-Gumti fundamentally different from every other entry places. It isn't hidden because nobody's heard of it. Conservationists, researchers, and serious wildlife travelers have known about this park for decades. It's hidden because it is genuinely difficult to reach and even harder to move through once you're inside it. There are no paved roads cutting through the park's core. Large sections remain effectively unsurveyed by modern researchers, even now, in an era where satellite imagery can resolve individual rooftops. Field research teams working in Gashaka-Gumti have described entire valleys and highland plateaus where sustained human presence is essentially non-existent, where the terrain itself, steep, forested, frequently shrouded in mist, actively resists the kind of casual access that most national parks around the world are specifically designed to accommodate. And the wildlife inside the park reflects that extraordinary isolation. Gashaka-Gumti is home to one of the last genuinely viable populations of Nigeria-Cameroon chimpanzees, a subspecies found in only a small handful of locations on Earth, straddling the Nigeria-Cameroon border region. These chimpanzees are considered critically endangered, and the population within Gashaka-Gumti represents one of the most significant strongholds for the subspecies' long-term survival. Beyond the chimpanzees, the park shelters forest elephants navigating dense understory vegetation, along with lions in some of the park's more open savanna sections, an increasingly rare combination of species coexisting within a single West African protected area. The bird diversity is similarly extraordinary, with an extensive range of species recorded within the park's boundaries, some found in few, if any, other locations across the country. Perhaps the single most remarkable fact about the Gashaka-Gumti is this: researchers still routinely describe substantial portions of the park as undersurveyed. That's not a vague marketing phrase. It's a real, documented acknowledgement within conservation and biological research communities that there are areas of this park where comprehensive species inventories simply haven't been completed, which means there is a genuine, scientifically credible possibility that species living within Gashaka-Gumti's boundaries remain formally unrecorded by science. Undiscovered not because they're rare on Earth, but because almost nobody has been able to look closely enough, for long enough, in the right remote corners of this specific landscape. This isn't an entirely uninhabited landscape either. That would be its own kind of oversimplification. Local Fulani and other highland communities have lived along Gashaka-Gumti's edges for generations, herding cattle across sections of its grassland, maintaining a relationship with this terrain that long predates the park's formal conservation status. Their presence sits at the margins of the park's boundaries, a living reminder that unexplored and uninhabited are not the same thing. This landscape has always had people connected to it, even as its deep interior remains one of the last true unknowns left on the African continent, and arguably in this entire hemisphere. That's what earns Gashaka-Gumti the top spot on this countdown. 5 places, 1 country, a skyline being physically built from the ocean floor, 1 dredged hectare at a time, a granite monolith older than the nation itself, staring silently down at a highway full of people who've stopped noticing it, a beach with no name outside its own region, still living by the tide the same way it has for centuries, a castle that, by any reasonable measure, shouldn't exist where it does, and yet stands there anyway, and a wilderness so vast, so vertical, so resistant to easy access, that Nigeria is still, quite literally, in the process of discovering itself. If this countdown showed you a version of Nigeria you genuinely didn't know existed, that's exactly the point of this channel. We bring in this content every week, and to watch more of this content, subscribe to this channel and see world's geographical areas you've never seen. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.